Hey, Armand here with some thoughts, let's call it, on Neptune in Aries, 2025 to 2039. That's a long period of time. Here's a little description of how we're going to do this. I'm going to give an overview of Neptune in Aries, and then I am going to give a little introduction to how to listen to the part about each sign, and then each sign will have its own little section. I'll put timestamps on all of this. I suggest you listen to the overview, and I really suggest you listen to the instructions. They're not really instructions, but little caveats about the forecast for each sign. And then go to your sign and see what you think. And you can go watch anybody's sign that you want. You can watch them all for all I care. Anyways, let's get started with an overview of Neptune in Aries. Let's think about Neptune. You know, it's hard to talk about Neptune. It's hard to think about Neptune. It's a very nebulous kind of energy. And it is often associated with things like illusions and delusions. But it's more proper to say that it has to do with other realms. It has to do with the astral realm, the realms, the imaginal, not imaginary, but imaginal realms. And the thing is that those realms are real, but they don't translate down to this realm all that easily. They don't translate down to, let's call it, Saturnian reality. With Neptune, you don't get much of a payoff. There's no real bottom line that you're going to say, oh, well, this is what it's about. And you have an experience, and experientially, you know what things are about, but what exactly is the tangible thing that we get out of this? Not so certain. Uh, Neptune is, in a way, the opposite energy of Saturn, the real bottom line planet. In a couple of weeks, when we have a video about Saturn going into Aries, it'll be very different. It'll be much more concrete and definitive than anything we can say about Neptune. Yeah, Neptune is essentially kind of the opposite of Saturn, although if I say that Neptune is the opposite of Saturn, then I think Jupiter and potentially Uranus and maybe even Pluto might get mad at me because they might want to be the opposite of Saturn too. Okay, so let's think about what happens when these imaginal realms start to sort of filter down into the collective. And Neptune in a sign shows us what we as a collective are fascinated with. It's where our collective fascination goes. And it's a real interesting study, and maybe someday I'll do a video about the whole history of Neptune through the signs. But just to back up a little bit, Neptune from, let's say, 1997-ish to 2011 was in the sign of Aquarius. Very forward thinking, very technologically oriented sign, very much connecting. And this was the time when we all started living online. The whole period of time with Neptune in Aquarius while Uranus was in Neptune sign of Pisces really was the whole thing about social media and that whole getting us to live online. Things like this YouTube video, a very good example of the kind of fascination that, and remember what the fascination was, with all social media. Not all of it took off and plenty of it fizzled and all of that. But the technology, the idea of having, the watch on your hands and you could, and it was modeled on the Dick Tracy two-way wrist TV for those of you who have any idea of what that's a reference to. And a little bit of the Star Trek, the when they talk to the ship and stuff like that. The iPhone had a lot of connection with that. The kind of, fascination with technology and fascination with communication. That was Neptune in Aquarius. And then from 2011 to 2025, Neptune is in Pisces. And now we have a lot of different fascinations and concerns. And we don't really have like the perspective on that yet because Neptune is not done with Pisces. It's going to be going back and forth through 2025. But So we don't have the complete perspective on it, but Neptune rules things like migrants and homeless, right? And so these have been the big political issues, things that have really charged up the political landscape, particularly in Europe and the United States. And the complexities of it, and the different sides and all that. That's a separate story. But the truth is that, migration and immigrants and the sort of opening the Piscean doors, and we're being flooded with immigrants, this kind of thing, very much the Neptune and Pisces, one aspect of Neptune and Pisces. It's where our concerns are. Now, that's a real issue. That's a real, that is a Saturnian issue. That is a concrete issue. And yet the way that we approach it with the kind of, the sort of overblown, on both sides of the spectrum, the kind of overblown approach to it, that's the very Neptunian side of this Piscean energy. Other things that happen, though, with Neptune in Pisces, for one, it is a period of time where the connection to other worlds has become pretty much mainstreamed. And folks like John Edward and Teresa Caputo, both of them Long Island mediums, by the way, just both of them from Long Island, um, have really mainstreamed the idea of connecting with the departed. And that's only one side of it, but it is a very, very popular side of it. And they each have a lot of connection to different celebrities that have helped to mainstream the process. It's very Piscean as well. And then, of course, we have things like the legalization of cannabis and the move towards being able to do research with psychedelics, Pisces and Neptune both associated with drugs. And it's funny that it's not funny, but it's very Neptunian that one of the big rallying points for the use of psychedelics is actually having to do with PTSD, and that's a little bit of an Aries issue as well. But it's certainly, the post-traumatic sounds very Neptune in Pisces. The things that we are fascinated by, the things that we are concerned with, and yes, at the collective level, these things certainly do filter down to things that you can touch and feel, or at least issues that we debate. It's not entirely out there in the astral realms, and yet it's different. It's different than, well, for example, with Saturn in Pisces, we've seen legislation about all of these issues. We've seen, real hard determination. We're going to do something about this. Again, whatever you do, we put laws in place. So, Saturn's passage through Pisces, especially in the last 3 years, has helped us to, or forced us to, bring some of these Neptunian issues down to earth and make them even more concrete. And more about that later. But let's talk about Neptune getting into Aries. Now, Neptune dips into Aries starting on March 30th of 2025, is going to back out again later in the year, spend some time at the very end of Pisces, and then come forward again. And in early 2026, Saturn, who's sort of following Neptune, Saturn and Neptune are going to meet in Aries early in 2026. So what we have for 2025 is this kind of sample. We're kind of moving into the Aries energy, and then we're sort of stepping back. Both planets go into Aries, get themselves situated a bit, sort of test the water. What are we going to make this about? What do we want this to be about? That's a big question. What are we going to do with Neptune in Aries? We're sort of testing it out. It's going to be there until 2039. Again, in 2038, comes in to Taurus and then backs into Aries. But that's 14 years in the future, and we'll worry about that then. I'll have a different video. I'll have a new video out in 2039 on Neptune in Taurus. It would be 2038 on Neptune in Taurus. So, you want to subscribe to make sure you get that notice. Anyways, Neptune comes into Aries, and we start to get an idea of what the Neptune and Aries themes might be. But we're not locked in 2025. We're going to be locked in fairly early in 2026, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. But for 2025, we're not locked in. Now, Aries, that's Mars' home sign, and Aries is a sign that we associate with beginnings. It is the beginning of the zodiac. Pisces is the end. It's about letting go. It's about dissipation of energy. And Aries is the initiation. It's the little crocuses that pop up in the springtime. It's that kind of here I am energy. Pisces, very much about spirit, very much about letting go. Aries, very much about asserting, very, very individualistic sign. So we're going to put a little bit of emphasis on the individuals. Who's the strong individual? Interestingly, Neptune is going to sextile. Well, Neptune is sort of always near sextiling Pluto, but Neptune is going to sextile Pluto early in the stay in Aries. And it's a very different kind of energy because Pluto in Aquarius is all about the collective and the group values and ideals, especially ideals. And Neptune in Aries is going to be a little bit more highlighting the individual and the individual contributions, the individual perspective. And yet they're sort of working harmoniously, which is a little strange. We'll see individuals who are championing the collective value. That's something that's happening early on in Neptune's stay in Aries. It's sort of worth looking at. We'll deal with it as we get closer to the actual events, but it is sort of part of the tone that gets set. Now, Aries is also the sign, it's a lot to do with competition, and I imagine that we'll be idealizing athletes and others who are real mavericks, who go their own way, people who are departing from the norm, people who are starting up new things. Very much the kind of thing we'll be fascinated with. Um, and Aries is also the sign of war. And Aries is the Greek name for Mars. Mars is the god of war. So the sign is literally named for the god of war. And will we idealize war? Well, some of us will. Some of us certainly will. Those of you familiar with U.S. history, everybody's pretty familiar with U.S. history, will recognize that the last time that Neptune was in Aries was from the years 1861 to 1875, which is pretty much, it's exactly the Civil War and Reconstruction era in the United States. And so astrologers are looking to Neptune's time in Aries from 2025 onwards as, with a degree of trepidation. When we talk about Uranus getting into Gemini, we'll have another layer to that story, but that's coming up in a couple of months, so we won't talk about that right now. So yeah, there will be something of an idealization of war and military kinds of things. However, Neptune plays both sides of the story, and as much as going to inflate on the one hand, it's also going to kind of bring down on the other hand. One thing that Neptune does for sure is to dissipate energy, to dissolve things. And so the inflation that we get with Neptune often is followed by a kind of deflation. Like the air pumps up the balloon rather large, but then the deflation happens as well. So for anything that Neptune touches, it becomes a sort of a hot button issue. It becomes something that gets idealized. And then it doesn't work out the way anybody thinks about it, not the way anybody is planning it out. Another thing that we're going to be seeing, I think, with Neptune in Aries as a kind of idealization is, let's call it sort of not the second sexual revolution. That would be a little bit of an overstatement, I think. But I would, Aries Mars sign has much to do with sex and drive. The sexual revolution of the 60s, that was Neptune in Scorpio. And part two, the sequel, let's say, would be Neptune in Aries. And I think, again, with the sextile to Pluto, I think that we'll see a great deal of emphasis on sexual individuality, doing your own thing, and situating that within the collective. And so some of the more conservative kinds of energies that we're seeing in 2024, 2025, which are kind of a pushback against sex, particularly in the US, is particularly a pushback against LGBTQIA, the rest of the alphabet. Um, that I think is a short-lived pushback, and that Neptune and Aries is going to push things further. Again, though, things get inflated and then they get deflated. Much more looking at Saturn to come along and see what he can do with the situation. Although Saturn will make the laws regarding any of these Aries issues from, from whether it's sex or war or competition. We're likely to be, idealizing athletes quite a bit with Neptune and Aries. Uh, Saturn is going to kind of come and pave the road, and then Neptune is going to kind of flood it out. And it's not, if Neptune went through first, like it happened in Pisces, Neptune comes and opens up all these issues, and we sort of float around, and then Saturn comes and paves the road so that we have some practical laws. We're getting the opposite with Aries. Saturn is putting down the roots and the form, and Neptune is going to sort of uproot and dissolve something. So we'll see it go both ways. Of course, Saturn in Aries is very likely to be restrictive on things like sex, very likely to be restrictive on sports and competition, and even restrictive on things that are military. And then Neptune is going to kind of open it up and dissolve it. I did want to mention about Neptune in Aries. Last time Neptune was in Aries, Gustave Flaubert published Madame Bovary. It's quite a book. You don't need to like read it under the covers or anything like that. There's no flipping to the good parts or anything. But it is a book that was rather revolutionary at its time. And the idea of Madame Bovary is essentially the woman who is bored and seeks sexual adventure. Of course, it had to be written as kind of a morality tale back in the day, but it was somewhat scandalous at the time, among other things, for championing the very idea of women's sexuality. And but it shows that kind of maverick energy that we're likely to see in other areas. Now, we're not going to get a replay of that, but we're likely to see some sort of resonance with that. Again, it's the Neptune in Scorpio was our local sexual revolution, and now we're getting kind of like the part two, the second installment of it. We'll have to see where it goes. Okay, there's a bit of an overview of Neptune in Aries. The major thing, and this will be its own video in February of 2026, is the conjunction of Neptune and Saturn in Aries. Of Neptune and Saturn, Neptune has a very slow orbit, 168 years. And you know what I should mention? I should mention that the last time that Neptune and Saturn conjuncted in 1703 in the sign of Aries, very interesting things happened. There were a lot of earth changes that were happening in 1703. There was a giant dust storm that engulfed London. And there was also the formation of the Edinburgh Fire Company, people to go put out fires. And you think about Saturn like restricting and holding things together, and then they're meeting in Aries, which is the very first fire sign of the zodiac. And it's kind of like, well, we have to deal with fires now. Well, we have to go back to 1703 to find a conjunction of Neptune and Saturn in Aries. The next time Neptune was in Aries was in the 1860s, but that wasn't there was no Saturn there. The last time that Neptune and Saturn met was back in the pivotal time around 1990, the 1988 to 1993 mashup in Capricorn, where we had Saturn and Neptune, but also Uranus in the sign. And that was a real pivotal era. And we go back once more to the 1950s, in 1952, 53, and we had Neptune and Saturn meeting in Libra. Now, Neptune and Saturn, when they get together, set the tone for the mythos that we're telling ourselves about structure and power and government. Right? Saturn is government and the laws and so on. And Neptune is kind of like the mythos, right? So it's the myth about power, the story we're telling ourselves. It's not just a story. It's not just people talking. These things have a lot to do, as you'll see. You just think about Neptune in Pisces or Neptune in Aquarius that I was talking about. There's obviously real consequences of these things. So, in the sign of Libra, when they met in the 1950s, this is the sign of the other. And that was the period of time that really the formation of the world as two entities, right? There was the Iron Curtain dividing the communist world and the free world. And then, of course, there was the third world off to the side. And that was the dominant mythology, right, of power and government. That was the dominant mythology through the 1950s and the Cold War into the 1960s, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the 1970s, 1980s, Reagan, right? Tear down that wall. And that wall did get torn down when Saturn conjuncted Neptune in Capricorn. And that was the dissipation of that whole worldview that had, like, the communist and the free world, communist, capitalist, however you want to look at it. That was the dissipation of that whole worldview. And it was replaced with a kind of no borders kind of mentality, right? There was like, well, we're not going to divide things up anymore. The famous end of history, Fukuyama's book, The End of History. Well, it wasn't the end of history, but but it was certainly the end of a particular chapter in history. And the idea that, coming into that period of time with the Neptune, Saturn, Uranus conjunctions between 1988 and 1993, it was, the Berlin Wall came down, and briefly Russia flirted with having an open democracy. Didn't last very long, but, at least they were sort of taken by the idea. The assumption was that everybody would sort of be on the same playing field, right? The idea was we're going to be able to open up the whole world. We have the better system in the West, and we can get everybody on board. The idea was, we'll, like China, for example. Well, we'll engage them economically, and when their standard of living rises, they're just going to realize that we have the better system, and they're going to give up their whole totalitarian thing. It was a big mistake, of course, but you see that this is the without borders, right? Capricorn, Saturn sign of Capricorn, without borders. There's Neptune and Uranus in the sign, opening things up. Even the European Union, which you could argue, now, European Union formed exactly when Neptune and Uranus were conjunct in 1992. I know the conjunction part for sure. The It seems like it's the formation of a new entity, which in a sense it is, but really it was the opening up of the borders between European countries, right? It was the dissolution of the borders and the currency differences. Oh, it used to be fun. You used to go collect, you go get the lira from this place and the peseta from this place, be all, now it's just all the euro. And the history of the European Union is an interesting one. But you could say that was really a kind of dissolving of the borders between European countries. And we had the North American Free Trade Agreement came out of, out of this era. The idea was things were just going to be open. And that was the dominant myth. We've certainly seen what's happened to it. Well, that's okay. It was the dominant myth, and it works or it doesn't. And now Neptune conjunct Saturn in Aries is going to give us a new myth. And the same way that the whole communist free world dichotomy just sort of broke down, and it was the dominant mythos in 1987, and by 1995 it was just completely gone. And similarly, the mythos that we put in place in the early 90s is going to be replaced by whatever we decide to create out of that missing mixture of Neptune and Saturn in Aries. So that's a big pivotal moment. And in 2025, when I assume most of you will be watching this video, we have to recognize that we are trying out the possibilities for what that mythos is going to be. You know, uh, I'm sure most of us feel that it's a bit out of our hands, and it is Neptune after all, so that may not be wrong. All right, let's talk about the individual signs. And here we have got to give you a little caveat here. Neptune works very subtly. What Neptune actually does in transit to any of us individually is subtle. And he has 14 years in the sign, so he's in no rush anyway, right? So that's another factor. It's a subtle shift and change. It is something that is going to take place over the course of time. Whatever I suggest for any sign, you'll probably have some experience of any or all of the different suggestions I give, and yet it's likely not to be all that overt. Now, in 2039, you'll say to yourself, Armand was right. I sort of do see what he was talking about. That's not a lot to go on, of course, but that's kind of the way it's going to play out. Now, if you've been watching these planets into sign forecasts before, you know that I usually say, oh, pay attention to your sun and ascendant sign. And sometimes I'll say, well, pay more attention to the ascendant sign. And in this case, I'm telling you, pay more attention to the sun sign. Okay, now your ascendant sign, it matters. It matters. But what house Neptune is going in for you is going to be dependent on what degree of that house. So let's say Neptune is going into your second house, your Pisces ascendant, Neptune's going into your second house of finances and material possessions. Well, the truth of the matter is, you might have 15 degrees of Aries on the cusp of your house of finances, which means that it's going to be 7 years before Neptune gets into the house. Or you'll feel a little bit of it as soon as he gets into the sign. It's true. But you're not really going to feel it until he goes into the house. And you may not even really recognize it then. So I would suggest you look at your sun sign and don't look at it in terms of events. That's not going to work too well. Look at it in terms of your feelings and your concerns and the things that you're worried about and the things that you're not sure about. That would be my strategy for this for each of them. I mean, of course, if you talk to your astrologer and get a session that's more personalized, and you find out Neptune is conjuncting or squaring this planet at this particular time. That's a different story. But as an overview for everybody that you get for free on YouTube, use your sun sign and figure this is kind of a little bit slow moving and vague. Even with the sun sign, of course, if your sun is at the beginning of the sign, if it's at the end of the sign, that's a pretty big difference. Let's talk about Aries. Now, Aries is getting the Neptunian energy most directly. And, again, with Neptune being the sign that rules Pisces, the end of the zodiac, and Aries being the initial sign of the zodiac, these are very contrasting energies. There's a real sharp contrast between the Aries energy and the Pisces energy. And as Neptune comes into Aries, it's going to feel a little bit strange. Aries like to be directed. Aries like not to be they like to be directive. They like to be doing things. They like to be active. They like to have a direction, right? It's a vector. You have a direction plus speed and power. That's Aries energy. Neptune is not that energy by any stretch of the imagination. It can dissipate that energy. So Aries has a couple of different possibilities. And again, they're probably all going to play out over the course of 14 years. And they're probably going to do so relatively subtly. On the harder side of things, it can dissipate the energy of Aries. And so Aries who like to be independent, who are mavericks, who are like to be moving in a direction, like to be moving in their own direction, might have the experience of saying, I'm not really sure where I want to go. I'm not really sure where I'm headed. That's not the worst thing in the world for sun signs, but I don't think it's pretty close to the worst thing in the world for many Aries. It's a different kind of feeling of like, well, I'm not really sure what I want to do. The flip side, though, is being very sure what you want to do, because Neptune can also give you that mission, that cause. And so you can set out to save the world or save some part of it. Or perhaps, save yourself in the midst of it with some project or plan that would be great for you. And even here, we have two possibilities on this more active, moving towards the ideal. You see, Neptune can either send you into the bay and you lose sight of the lighthouse, and now you don't know which way to go. Or you can be in the fog and see a bright light and start rowing towards it. Now, is it the lighthouse that's going to save you? Is it the new goal that is really great for you? Or is it something, or is it just a reflection of a sign from a neon sign from a diner someplace? Which in and of itself would not be that bad. But the point is, for Aries, you may find a really good thing to move towards and get really excited about it. And that thing can be great. Or you could be kind of tilting at windmills. You could be having a little bit of a Don Quixote kind of experience where you are sure you've got to go off and do something. And, but it's a little bit fanciful in and of itself. That's, the possibility that is there. So, you might feel lost part of the time. You might feel that you found a new thing that you're going to go towards. Sometimes it's going to be great. Sometimes it's going to be a little bit less than great. Is it going to be monumental for you? Well, it's hard to say. My guess is probably not. But, it is your sign. And at some point in time, Neptune is coming over your sun. And that is a fairly challenging transit that is going to result in things like this happening. So Aries, you know, you got the well, what a caution light. A red light. What is a red light? Because red is the color of Aries anyway, right? So, but you've got a little bit more to think about and to weigh in your experience. Now let's go backwards to Pisces. You've got the chart ruler, you've got your sun's ruler, or the chart ruler if you're looking at your ascendant, leaving the sign. So those of you that have the Piscean energy, the ruler is leaving Pisces to go into the next sign. Now, when we have a planet like Neptune getting out of the sign, that can feel pretty good. We're no longer under the sway of it. for better or worse. I thought that if you're a Pisces, Neptune on your sun or crossing your ascendant might not be such a bad idea. I thought, this, it's the ruler after all. So it should be good. And I do believe in working with clients of both the Pisces ascendant and sun sign persuasion. I do believe that ultimately it kind of came across as being something that is positive in showing the importance for Pisces to release. But it was certainly not quite as easy as it might have been. Pisces midheaven too. The the sense of you've kind of got to do that thing which you're really here to do. You're on a mission, and yet it's Neptune, and sometimes it didn't offer everything. Well, now Pisces, it's in your second house, and this is now a matter of finances. And you may be very concerned about finances. You may feel it may be hard to sort of keep track of money. You may sort of leak finances. You just kind of, I don't know what happened to the money. I don't know where it went. I don't know where it's coming from. So there could be this sort of vague feeling about finances that can be kind of upsetting. Or, of course, you can get a really brilliant idea, and again, you're out on the path to make this ideal thing come true. For Pisces, the important thing is finances and material possessions. You want to have as realistic a view of it as possible. don't don't see the glass as being empty. Don't see it as being full. It's half full. Saturn will help you. Saturn will help you over the course of the first 3 years of this transit, at least, to help you get settled, to help you get an idea of things. So Saturn coming into your house of finances is going to put the restrictions on. It's going to make things a little bit more realistic. Pay attention. Aquarius. The thing about Aquarius, this is a third house transit. It'll have a lot to do maybe with your, yes, siblings and things like that. Maybe your own thinking, your own mindset about things. That might be the case for Aquarius. I think mostly, though, it has a lot to do with, believe it or not, neighborhood and daily routines. Now, nobody likes this. This is not a big, exciting thing for most people. And yet, where we live, the way we live on a daily basis, where you do your food shopping, how long it takes to get a cup of coffee at the place you get, these things all matter tremendously. The traffic that you're in, ooh, public transportation, all of these kinds of things, they really make a big difference in our lives. And for Aquarius, I think that it could be a real quest to find a good routine, a good neighborhood, a good place to be on a daily basis. It's something we neglect so easily. Right? It's not exciting like relationship and career and money. It's not exciting like that. And yet, it's like 90% of our lives. So, Aquarius, it's down to you. Now, Capricorn, this is a fourth house transit. It has to do with family. It has to do with home. It has to do with where you feel you belong. And in general, the rule is that when Neptune is playing with your fourth house, you really want to be at home. You really want to feel grounded. You really want to put down roots. And yet it seems so elusive. You have this ideal place. I'm going to go live in, and then, you fill in the blank according to your own disposition. And it could be better, and you might have a really great time with it. It might be really, really wonderful, or it might fail to live up to expectations. It may feel like it's, pretty good, but somehow or another I expected more. That's kind of, is that all there is kind of the Neptune slogan. So you may have a little issue with that. This could be a time when you're really focusing on things like home ownership. It might be a time when you're looking to move, make a big move. It might be a time when your connection with family and your roots, like where you originally came from, the home that you originally came from, the place that you originally came from, that energy somehow dissipates and it's no longer there. And that might be what sets you off on the quest to find my space, my home. Again, Saturn is going to help out to the beginning of the transit, although he helps out in a very particular way. We'll talk about that in a couple of months. Let's right now talk to Sagittarius. This is a fifth house transit for you. Creativity, your joy, the thing that you love to do, the things that you feel are enlivening you. These things are going to be the focus for Sagittarius. This is a very nice transit. Avoid speculating too much. The fifth house is also speculation and gambling, and Neptune can really get you to feel like, well, the only thing I need to do is win the lottery, so I'll invest all my money in lottery tickets, and then that would not be such a great idea. But in general, that's my Cancer moon talking, but in general, it's a time when, that what gives you passion, follow your passion, follow your passion. And the fact that it's Neptune and it may not be so realistic and it may not, give the payoff, that doesn't really matter all that much for this because you're going to have the experience of it, Sagittarius. So that's terrific. Scorpio. Ooh, this is a sixth house transit for you, Scorpio. It's a little hard. Um, what you're in service to, what you're working towards, what you feel as the thing that you need to do, that can be affected. And so you may sort of lose that sense of this is what I really want to do. Sixth house is the house of work. And being in the Neptunian fog could feel a little bit like, I don't know. Or again, this is a slightly different flavor of that idea of what you're really what you feel you need to do. What is it that needs to be saved? What is it that needs to be saved in the world? So that's the Scorpio task, to decide what it is that needs to be saved and then to go ahead and save it. You might also find that the situation with coworkers and people that work for you winds up changing considerably. But, in 14 years, we would expect that to change considerably anyway. Libra. Libra, this is a seventh house transit to you, and so it is the other. Now, there could be a lot of ways to look at this. It could be finding the ideal partner. It could be losing the ideal partner. It could be finding a really, really awful enemy, or well, that's really it then with the enemies, right? Or your enemy just simply dissipates and disappears. Um, the thing for Libra is, right, the focus is on the other, and here we have sort of the strong other, right? The Libras are always considering the other. That's why the world got divided into two when Saturn and Neptune met in Libra. Libra is about looking for the other. And with Neptune in Aries, we're looking at a strong, powerful other. So the caveat for Libra is you're likely to see too much in someone or a situation, particularly a person, and you may really, really tend to either demonize the person or to turn them into a saint, to see them as someone that needs to be rescued, or I would think with Neptune in Aries, to see it as someone who's going to rescue you. You're dealing with people. Some people are kind of a little difficult. We have to accept that. But watch out for the tendency to see too much in a person. On the other hand, of course, seeing too much in a person is kind of nice, and I wouldn't want to rule that experience out for anyone. In the same way, though, seeing someone as being like, a real baddie or something like that, well, you don't want to do too much of that. But again, whether the other is the knight in shining armor, the princess in the tower, or the dragon that needs to be slayed, it's a drama, and try to remember that it's a drama. Go with it to the extent that it's fun, but remember that it's a drama. We should all remember that everything is a drama. Virgo, this is an eighth house transit for you. Um, one, it's not good to, especially for Virgos. I don't want to start with negative things for Virgos. A positive thing, hey, you may really believe that you're going to get an inheritance or win the lottery or something like that. You're likely to be a little concerned about some of the great monsters of society, the tax man, the insurance companies, and things along those lines. That might be kind of your concern for a little bit. This is a very healing energy, though, Virgo. You take it away from that mundane level where things are going to be a little bit foggy and nebulous. This is kind of a shamanic journey. This is kind of a shamanic journey for you. The ability to go deep into your own psyche, to bring out things that you had no idea were there. Um, Evaluate them realistically? Maybe, maybe. Again, maybe Saturn would help with the realistic evaluation, although he's not going to be around for very long, and he may actually sort of prevent the shamanic journey from starting for a little while. But that's kind of where it goes for you, Virgo. This is a deep journey into what really matters. Oh, and think of it very much in terms of the emotional strength. It's an eighth house transit. It's the house of birth, which is very Aries, sex, which is very Aries, and death, which is not. Which is not. But it's that point where the biology connects with the personality, right? It's the things that when you're undergoing them, they've got your attention. And that implies the deeper emotional set, the stuff that is really connected to the body. Now, Virgos, that could be a little bit of a challenge for you. There's no two ways about it, but it would certainly be a very worthwhile endeavor for you. Leo, this is the ninth house transit, and well, you could feel that your belief system and your religious system is dissolving. You might lose faith for a little bit, but it's also the possibility of finding faith and really having that experience of finding the system that is going to work for you. Not to say that it's, the one truth for everybody, but it's the system that works for you. It could be finding a guru or a teacher who is really there for you, that can be the person who can guide you along. Again, you can see a little too much or a little too little in someone when Neptune is around. So you gotta be careful. There could be a few charlatans out there in the spiritual world, but that's kind of where it goes for you. On a more secular level, it could simply be a belief system or a philosophy. If you're watching this video, my guess is that that's not too much the concern for folks. I think that it's probably more likely to go onto the spiritual side of things. But, um, it could even resonate out as far along as things like, political beliefs and so on like that. But I really think that it has a more spiritual angle to things. You might also find yourself idealizing the potential to live someplace overseas or something like that, which, depending upon where you are, is not a bad idea. For the sign of Cancer, this is a 10th house transit, and that means that it affects things like career, your reputation in the world, and so on. And Neptune can get you to feel that you want that ideal career. What you're doing for money is one thing, and what you're doing to be a being in the world, contributing to the world, is another. And Neptune can kind of get you to think, wow, what's my contribution? What am I doing here? Where is the real value in what I'm doing? Where's the value in who I am and how I'm interacting and how I'm presenting myself to the world? Yeah, stick to your Cancerian roots, think about the things that really matter to you. It's a very value oriented sign. But then think also too, how can we up it a little bit? How can we get a little bit more out of it? It might really indicate for some of us, for some of you, it might indicate a change in career status. You might decide to do something very, very different. Or maybe not. How's that for a prediction? Gemini. This is an 11th house transit for you. It is fairly harmonious. It could really affect things like your political beliefs, what you're doing in terms of the organizations that you're a member of. It could, you might really feel the need to, here we go. I always say I don't like it, but I always use it. So you might really feel the need, Gemini, to find your tribe. That's the people who agree, well, yeah, probably the people who agree with you, the people who resonate with you on the level of your highest ideals, the people who really you want to be around. Now, the flip side of it is that those folks who are just kind of around because, they've been around your life forever, or they are, let's say, in the neighborhood, or they're just convenient. They're likely to kind of disappear a little bit, especially early on. You might feel that loss, especially with Saturn coming into the sign at the same time. That sense of who you connect with could dissipate and be restricted, and you might find that you're losing a lot of friends who are no longer really great friends. The friends of convenience are going to kind of be on their way. But it opens up the door to find the friends who you really do want to be with, the people you really do want to share your time with. So that's a very positive kind of thing for you, Gemini. I would say it's a little late to tell this to Sagittarius, but that's also part of the Sagittarian energy for the Neptune in Aries. And then finally, we get to the sign of Taurus, for whom this is going to be a 12th house transit. Now, this is something that is behind you. This is off to the side. This is the angel and the devil on your shoulders. This is the guardian angel and anybody else who happens to be around. Uh, Taurus, of course, has been dealing with Uranus going through the sign, and hopefully Uranus, I don't, opened you up a little bit and got a little bit of, I don't want to say flexibility, but a little bit of capacity to handle change. Here comes Neptune from the 12th house, and could be opening you up to things that are beyond the earthly. And Taurus is the first earth sign. You might have very vivid dreams. It might be a time when you really want to do dream work. You might really feel the need, Taurus, to go on retreat, to back away from things for a while. Get a cabin up in the woods or something like that, and just sort of step aside for a while. It could be a time when you're actually feeling a little bit less enthused about the Taurian pleasures that are so part of your mindset and experience. It could be a time when things that are beyond the physical start to take on an especially bright glow. Neptune can get us to see things as having a glow to them. And for Taurus, very much the possibility that this is something that is not of this world. So, if you're up for it, Taurus, it's a really great experience. But, it's a little different. It's a little different. All right, there's a little hint for each sign. Again, it gives you a basic kind of idea of where things might go, things to look out for. You're going to hear me say many of the same things when we talk about Saturn going into Aries, but it's going to be a little bit more definitive. With Neptune, this is for the long haul, and it's slow moving, and it is a little harder to get your head around, a little harder to grasp in any sense of the word. But it's Neptune, so you shouldn't be trying to grasp it much anyway.